Alright, here's another video on how to make a cheap plane out of this foam. This time I chose to go with 3/4 inch foam because I'm making a micro plane and I didn't feel like gluing two pieces together and sanding them back down and having that line in the wing. So I bought this piece of 3/4 inch foam. It's $13.68 versus the 1/2 inch being $7.50. What I did is I went ahead and cut a block out right there just with an X-Acto knife, and I'm going to lay it down like that, trace around the wing, get my pattern. I'm going to cut it out on a bandsaw. I'm going to get my wing fully shaped, sand it down, and put a servo dead in the middle on the wing. I'm going to mount it on the wing, get my linkages and everything hooked up like that, and then I'm going to start on the fuselage. Okay, quick progress shot just to show you what I did. If you look right here, if I can zoom in on it somehow, I've got a center line drawn for the center of the plane, very important. And then I've got the two lines here are where the fuselage is going to sit. I'm going to leave that flat just because it's going to be easier to carve a flat hole into the fuselage than it is to try to sand the whole thing down into a wing shape. Anyway, use like a 60 or an 80 grit, I think it's 80 grit on a block, and get the general shape. Then take some 220 like that, sand it down smooth, and there's your general airfoil for the top. See there? Mark a center line as I did here. You see I got a center line marked all the way down that. Sand to the line, but don't sand over the line. You see here I sanded to the line, almost to the line there. That way you got the center there. Also marked this is going to be my center of gravity line here. Sand up to it on one side and then sand to it from the other side, and then the finish, you can see a little bit of the line here, not much of it. Camera doesn't zoom well, but anyway, sand to it on one side, sand to it the other. Sand down to your center lines on the edges, and then you'll come out with a pretty decent airfoil. Alright, there you go. That's the semi-finished wing right there. I got the center section that's going to go up inside the fuselage. I left the front on it because when I join it to the fuselage, I'm going to kind of sand that around and mold it into whatever's there, but I did sand the back completely down because from the fuselage there's going to be a little fake air intake that comes over, and I'm just going to have it to where it comes over top of that and glue it on however it's got to go. But okay, here's the two pieces I cut out to make the fuselage out of. They're 3/4 inch piece. I decided to make the fuselage the same as it is on the little picture, which is 1.5 inches wide. And I've sprayed this. You buy some of this 3M Super 77 spray adhesive. This stuff will melt the foam if you put it on thick. What you want to do is hold the can way out here, and about 1.5 feet from it, and mist it over the foam. You want to let them dry for about 2 or 3 minutes. When you put these together, they will stick together and you will not be able to pull them apart. So make sure you have them where you want them when you put them together. The reason they're so oddly shaped is because the fuselage is gonna, I just cut some pieces out. This is gonna go on there like that, and we're gonna cut that out on a bandsaw. Alright, I've assembled these together and left them for about, you need to let them dry for at least 10 or 15 minutes. You can work with it sooner than that, but you may get a little bit of air bubble in between or anything like that. But push them together, let them dry for a little bit together. My secret is pile up some encyclopedias on the top of them. This I just used 4, stacked them on top, and pressed it all together. You can see the design is traced out on there. I'm going to go cut it out on the bandsaw real quick. Alright, you can start to see how it's coming along now. It's turned into a itty bitty little plane. That's the cut out fuselage. You see I need to taper the tip a little bit, but that's so minute that I wanted to do that by hand with sandpaper to get this taper. But the back is tapered down like that, and the side cut out. You can see how that little notch, cut a notch out there in the bottom, and that just sits on top of that. It fits pretty snug, but anyway, you see how that's going to fit in there. The top part, I'm going to cut the canopy off with a hot wire and hollow the inside of that out, and for the battery, so I can magnetically attach the canopy onto the top and remove it and stick the battery in. I'm making the stabilizers out of balsa wood just to kind of get the scale appearance because they're so thin. I couldn't make them out of foam, they'd just be too brittle. And the front, you're going to see, I'm going to end up chopping this thing off pretty short, mount the motor to that, and then fiberglass around once I get this thing sanded to shape, I'll take that nose cone that I take off and actually wrap it in fiberglass. Once it's hardened, I'll melt the foam out of the inside of it and put it back over top of the motor. That way I get a more stock appearance, but it'll be a hollow fiberglass cowl over the motor because I'm using a really small outrunner motor. Alright, well, here it is, sanded down. You can see now why I left that little tab, that little squared off piece that was on the bottom of the wing, That way once I rounded off the fuselage, I put the wing in place and then just blended it in with the rest of the fuselage. Alright, next step is to install servos, control surfaces, things like that. So what I did is slice this little section off the back of the fuselage right here with a hot wire. It's got a guitar string on it. It's just a piece of plastic. You can use a board, anything that's non-conductive. But anyway, hook a jumper cable, or not a jumper cable, a battery charger like that to one side where it goes to the guitar string. The other side has this little wire wrapped all the way around. It comes over to this point. Hook your other cable to there. The wire will get red hot if you leave it on, but as soon as you start cutting the foam, it cools it back down. But it makes a really nice clean slice that you can put back together later. Anyway, buried a servo down in the bottom there. I didn't have room to have the servo arm coming straight out and work the wire because it would have came out of the top of the or the bottom of the fuselage, I should say. So I took it and made it curved. I took a piece of little plastic tubing. You can use a coffee stirrer, you can use whatever kind of tubing you got, and I ran a guitar string through that, and it works really well. And the reason I did it, I wanted it to come out straight out the tail, because where the horizontal stabilizer sits, that's going to pop out right up underneath it, and there all the control lines and everything will be concealed, and you're not going to see a big control arm coming out the side of such a tiny little plane. Alright, I figured I'd show you another hot wire. This is one that I bought at a fabric store. They work extremely well on any kind of foam, but you plug that little inverter into the wall. It's got an on-off switch here. The cord plugs into the bottom, and it's just got about a 6-inch wire on there. The thing gets really hot and melts through foam better than the hot wire does because it's a little more uniform. And what I did, I used it to hog out the inside of the plane. If you remember, that was all solid, and I went down. I hogged out that part of the fuselage because that's where the servo from the wing is going to go in, and all the linkages and everything for the ailerons are going to sit in here. With the motor and the speed controller and servos and everything like that, it's going to be really nose heavy, so I needed to get the battery toward the back. I hogged out all that stuff in the back, so the battery will sit in there like so, and I'll hog out the canopy a little bit to get it to fit. But I think it's going to work really well. If not, I'll put a small 2-cell in there. Alright, here's a quick explanation of how I do my motor mounts. It's a little overkill, but I've never had one come loose, and I like it, and it's simple. Melt you 4 holes in the front of the fuselage. The large hole is for the wires to go through. The 4 small holes on the outside, melt them in there with a hot wire, a hot drill bit, piece of coat hanger, doesn't matter. You see they come through all the way to the back. Make them larger than your dowel rod, whatever you're using. I only had square today, so that's what I used. Stick them in there, make sure they sit flush with the face of the fuselage, and pour a bunch of hot glue in there around them. I cut them all the way through on this side so I can get some hot glue on the back side too. And once those are in place, the large hole in the middle is for your wires from your ESC to go to your motor. But the 4 holes on the outside, cut you out a piece of plywood, 1/16 inch plywood for something this small, 1/8 inch for larger models. Make sure it fits the fuselage really nice, and then drill 4 holes in it that match the 4 dowel rods. Put some epoxy or hot glue on the back of this thing, stick it on, run you 4 screws in there, and it'll pull it down. Not only is it screwed to the dowel rods that are glued into the fuselage, but it's also glued to the foam in the front. So there's no way that thing's going to come out. This is the little motor I'm using. It's a BP Hobby 2208/17, like a little $14 motor. This is the where I've gotten so far. I've got the speed controller in there. I've got the motor mounted. I've got a little 6-inch prop on there. I figured that'll look a little more scale. You can see my antenna for my receiver sticking out the side. When I get done with this thing, I'll just pull it back here and tape it in place. I tried to get the receiver on one side and the speed controller on the other, and it looked like it was working great until I realized that they were so thick that if I'd put the wing up in place with the servos and the linkages in it, they would be rubbing on the speed controller and the receiver. So what I ended up doing, if you can see it, way up in there's my receiver. It's just a little micro receiver, and I just hogged out behind the motor and stuffed the receiver up in that little hole, and I'm going to try that, see how that goes.